clean up after yourselves. This is one of the talks I've been looking forward to most because I celebrated these projects a lot over the past year. Who of you heard about OpenSchufa? That's why you're here. Yeah, exactly. Nearly all of you. And who helped with OpenSchufa? Quite a few. You're great. Maybe we can reverse engineer that damned algorithm. Anna is working on it with his people. And the second thing I really liked was offene Gesetze, open laws. Suddenly there's a portal that has all the federal law.
Genau so fand ich das.
And that's exactly what I thought of that.
Machen wir schnell jetzt. Der nächste Talk. Caught in the
Akten from with Stefan Wehrmeier, Weimar Palmetshofer, and Arne Semsrott.
Ja, guten Morgen.
Good morning. Nice to see so many of you so early in the morning for our talk, Caught in the Akten, a title that I'm probably the only one in finding really amusing. Well, one more person over there. Never mind. We're going to be giving a short talk on applied hacker ethics, and on especially the part about using, protecting private data and using open or public data. And we have two projects that use this in very different ways. Both of them are about private companies that act as if they were government agencies. But not when it comes to transparency, but in everything else. And we tried two different approaches to crack these companies. We'll start with OpenSchufa, and after that we will talk about offene Gesetze, and then we should have some time for discussion. Open data with the Schufa credit rating agency is a difficult topic. Schufa has data on almost 70 million people in Germany. And some of their information is very sensitive because it's financial data and missed payments on lots of people, probably most of you in this room. And people who don't have a lot to do with Schufa actually tend to think that it's a government agency, but it's a private company that doesn't publish its algorithms. People talk about their scores that are supposed to calculate the probability of somebody paying back a loan. There's not just one Schufa score for each person. There are about 16 of them. But the way they calculate these scores is a company secret. This was upheld in the courts as well, and Schufa doesn't need to publish the way they calculate these scores. But they can't stop people from reverse engineering these scores, and that's what we tried with OpenSchufa, which is a project of Open Knowledge Foundation and Algorithm Watch, and its goal is to reverse engineer the Schufa algorithm. We started a crowdfunding early this year. Many of you supported it and donated. Thank you very much. That allowed us to start this work. We had an advertising spot for which we could convince the very nice Nico Semsrott to appear. And the idea was, and still is, that everyone can request their own personal data under GDPR and receive them by mail. We then scan them and redact them, and people can then donate them to us. Many people did so on selbstauskunft.net. They requested their private data and then donated them to us. The Schufa wasn't exactly happy about this project. Very early in this crowdfunding, they added a huge banner to their website where they said that it's misleading and damaging to security and privacy in Germany. That was great of them. Thank you very much for that, Schufa. Because they had a huge banner on their homepage, Open Schufa, and the link to us, and they gave us a lot of traffic. That was really brilliant. Schufa was very unwilling to cooperate throughout the process. There were lots of journalists who tried to research individual cases and to confront Schufa with them. And this is a report from a journalist at the Welt newspaper who showed how Schufa talks to journalists because they exert a lot of pressure on journalists. They try to prevent reporting at the very last second. They say that they're spreading fake news, and this shows quite nicely that Schufa has a lot to hide. And what we could bring to the public is what Walter is now going to tell you.
Okay, so we essentially started to collect the data in May, and basically to implement this idea, protect private data, use public data. In this case, we need essentially private data to get to data that should be public, or to reverse engineer this data structure of data that should be public, in our opinion. In total, there are 100,000 requests to these scoring rating companies. There isn't just Schufa in Germany. We emphasize that repeatedly. There are other companies that use even worse data sets and that are even less well known. But we're always saying we'll start with Schufa, but it's not going to stop there. The really nice thing is, in other countries it's called my data. We'd like to call it our data, because we want people to know that what this data is, and that you can actually donate it, and that you can contribute this to a pool that can be used for the public good, and where we can essentially find out more. So over a half a year, we got 3,000 data donations, and we had one problem, that when people asked for their data from Schufa, then they got a piece of paper, they got it by letter, then they had to scan it and send it to us. And so a lot of data is lost because maybe the scan quality is bad. So that was the first challenge, that you have a switch from one medium to the next. And then there's a break between data, because the very simple thing is that the people who participated are on average probably above and different from the societal average. There were a lot of men. It was generally young people who were very urban, who were interested in technology. So the sample really isn't perfect. And on May 25th this year, the GDPR was implemented. And from that point onward, the Schufa published less data. That's kind of funny, because if there's a single company that should have prepared itself for GDPR, then it would have been this one company. It's one of the main companies that has personal data and has all this data about every single person. And yeah, not private people should be upset, but this company should be prepared. And that's probably also because the data protection commissioner there didn't think about it enough. Schufa basically had 7 months where they just didn't send out data that they should have given out. That really was a problem, because we got fewer pieces of information or couldn't use all of these data points that we had. But so the sample that we have isn't really representative. And the aim would have been to have 3,000 perfect data sets, and could have essentially model and emulate this Schufa algorithm. And so that's what this looked like before GDPR, if you requested your data. So you see the scores for different sectors. And then after May 25th, it was slightly less. So one thing that we try to figure out what are hard factors. So there are the different variables. There are several outliers here that I want to emphasize. One is when someone has declared bankruptcy. The other one is if the things you own are seized by the government to essentially pay for your for money that you owe. So these are two things. That's where your credit score goes far down very quickly. In these cases, it actually makes sense. So 95% of the score basically affect 3/4 of people, and there's basically, based on this data, they decide whether you can get a smartphone contract. But so the variables that they use to calculate these scores are pretty vague in our opinion, and we also assume that there are problems with incorrect data. For example, there are bad scores without any negative markers that affected 20 people who got a negative score but didn't have any negative data. If you calculate that up for the entire German population, that would affect a lot of people. But also, if you, for example, get a bad score and that affects your credit, then you might not even think of this because you have done everything right, and you might not think of the fact that maybe they made a mistake. There are also allegedly cases where there is a number of people that have fewer than 3 data points.
So I'd say this is a very thin soup, and the third part is that there are different versions of these scores. There's a version 1, version 2, version 3. Nobody really knows which bank requests which version and what that means. So there's a discrepancy between these score values, and I think these versions very nicely show what happens in the background, because there are companies who collect these data that are used in the scoring. They send it to Schufa, they use their non-official model, and then a third party uses them and uses the score to deny something to the consumer. It's this chain of people who say that they simply collect the data and don't actually use it, and say that who don't really want to publish how they calculated their scores. And this is one of the large problems if there happens anything, if anything goes wrong in the chain. For example, people who, if companies failed to report that people paid back their loans, then the system thinks that the loan is still in force, and people can then be denied further loans, and nobody can really find out what causes this, what link, which part of the chain caused this error. There are also the variables of age and gender and moving house. There are things that indicate that, for example, younger people or men have lower scores, and also the number of house removals affects your score. So people who move more often have lower scores, but there are people who are forced to move house, for example, because they have to run away from something worse, and these people can't prove that their removals were justified because they, for example, had to move to Bavaria, although that's already bad luck. And another nice finding is we see 3 patterns here. On the left-hand side, you see the number of credit cards, the number of bank accounts, and the number of mobile contracts. And you can see that the peak is always at the number 2. So if you have 2 credit cards, 2 bank accounts, and 2 phone contracts, then your score is likely to be very high. I would, of course, never claim that you can game the score, but 2 seems to be better than 1. But For example, if you're moving house only temporarily, you maybe shouldn't register with the offices.
Meistens vielleicht hilft da noch die Adaption, wenn es schnell gehen muss.
On the 30th of October, the Council of Experts of the Ministry of Justice published a report on consumer scoring, where they said that the algorithm has to be opened up, at least partially. And their claims were furthered by publications from the Bavarian public broadcaster and Spiegel Online, and Schufa, of course, responded with a 9-page letter that people were not allowed to quote. The Minister of Justice Bali also wanted more transparency from Schufa, and this led to the promise of electronic requests, data requests, where people will be sent a code by letter that they can then use online to request their data online. So if this works one time, you could probably create an account where people can do so regularly, and where people can correct their own data. And that's what we want. We want transparency on how these scores are calculated, how certain things affect the score, and that you can perhaps get notifications that tell people that they got a negative score, so that they know about it and have a chance to correct them, because this usually takes months of hard work to get companies to correct any mistakes they may have made in this entire process. These are the things we are hoping for in future. We say that Schufa is only the beginning and not the end. And we want to show what people can do when they share data and when they understand what it means when they give us their private financial data.
Zur Schufa. Meine Lieblingsslide hier raus. Die Frage ist natürlich, wie kann man die Schufa dazu kriegen, in Zukunft wieder mehr Daten rauszugeben? Die geben jetzt nicht alle Daten raus, die sie über einzelne Personen...
Okay, so the question is, the Schufa doesn't simply publish all the data that they have about one individual, but they publish data that they give others. And we actually think that according to GDPR, the Schufa actually should be publishing giving out much more information, and we want to force them to give out more information, more of the information that they have essentially saved about you. So that's also one way of doing this, is that we want to sue them. One thing that was also really important is that Minister Barley also demanded this. We hope that that's going to lead to something, because this is going to be a law in an ideal case. In that case, this law would basically be published in the Federal Law Gazette. Right? Yeah? Okay.
Und auch dafür haben wir was parat.
And so we have something prepared for this as well. Yes, open laws, or offene Gesetze. We already said in the beginning, laws, where do you find them? If you look for a law online, then you can find it on different websites, for example, De Jure or Busa. The official website is called Laws on the Internet, which is really important because otherwise you don't know where you're putting that URL in. And you can find every single law on there, and every official guidance. It's pretty current, but sometimes it takes a few days for the current version to be on there. But how does the law actually get to that place, to that point where it's published? And so I've made a quick graphic, because usually if you look for how a law is implemented and decided on, you find weird flow charts. I try to turn this into a Git remote process and present it as such. So you know, well, this is what it looks like. So there's one branch from the ministries. So they basically get a draft that gets to the government, that decides on it in the cabinet, then it goes to parliament, then it goes to the second chamber, which has the federal state representatives in it. And then once it's agreed on in parliament, then the government German government signs it again. So basically they're doing git sign. Then it goes to the German president, who also has to sign it. And then it goes into the production release branch, Germany, Federal Republic of Germany. And it gets merged in there, and then it basically is put in place. So only once it's on the production release branch is it actually a law that is in force. Before that, that hasn't actually happened. But the question is, where is this production release branch? Where is essentially the Git log for this? And the log for this is the Federal Law Gazette, also known as BGBL, which shouldn't be confused with the German law book. Basically, this is where laws are announced, and it's the Gazette where these are promulgated. There is a weird distinction between two German words here that is not relevant for the English translation. But the thing is that these laws are basically published and actually printed out in this Gazette. This was the first Federal Law Gazette of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949, where they actually published the basic law, the German Constitution. Unfortunately, it looks exactly the same in the year 2018. For example, here. This is an example. This is the law that legalized same-sex marriage. That is a so-called article law. And these article laws that are published in this Gazette change existing laws. So it's basically a patch. So if you look at this, it basically tells you that the existing law is changed in such and such a way. It tells you that paragraph 1309 is changed, and then essentially the wording is changed that marriage can be between two people rather than between a man and a woman. I personally think it's super complicated to read. I have no idea what the context for this whole thing is, and what I know is this, right? On the right side, then you can see what was added, what was taken out. But the problem is that it has to be readable by people and doesn't have to be readable by machines. Open laws, our project was more concerned with legal problems, but there are also technical problems, right? Because if you look for this website that publishes these things for the Gazette, then you get this website, very nice, very 2000. And if you look at this a bit more closely, you see this publishing company here, Bundesanzeiger. What is this publishing company? It's a private publishing company now. It used to be owned by the government, but was privatized in the 80s initially, and then in 2006 it was completely privatized and is part of Dumont Media Group. You may have heard about them. They publish several newspapers in Berlin and Cologne, all very high quality papers. And so this media group basically also publishes our laws. So if you kind of click a bit further on the website, then you can find the free citizen access. Oh, free citizen access. Well, I love that. I click on there and then I get this big green box with a warning. And it basically says the electronic version of the Federal Law Gazettes is basically an intellectual property protection. So basically this media company says that they have intellectual property rights to laws of the Federal Republic of Germany. But basically every law is a public agency piece of work that is not protected intellectually. But the collection of these laws, you could say that there is an IP claim there, and they're definitely laying the claim to these laws here. It's very obvious. They're putting that right on there, right on top, and they're laying claim to this particular IP right. If you try to click a bit further and look into these gazettes, you realize there is no search function. There is no OCR of PDFs before 1998. They're just pictures. The PDFs are basically with copy and protected, quote unquote, against copy and paste and printing them out. We may know how to get rid of those, but I guess the regular user who might just want to copy and paste something from there, some PDF readers might say, well, you can't do that, you have to put in a password. Of course, that's stupid. And then the pages themselves, actually, where you have a law on a page, they include ads in the footer. And then it, for example, says things things like, oh, you can go onto this website where you can look at all of these things, where essentially this private company is using the laws that they're publishing to advertise their own products. I think that's kind of inappropriate, and it's not actually related through the lawmaking process itself.
Aber man bekommt das natürlich auch
But of course, you can also access this in a different way, because you can essentially get a subscription for a half year. It'll cost you just 99 euros. And then suddenly all of these documents can be printed. You can take out pieces of text, so it's basically copy and paste. You can also get this as an email. You'll get it via newsletter. And so also when you're getting it via email, the subscription actually costs 108 euros for 6 months. One thing we also wanted to know is, how did this publishing company get to publish all of these things, and was privatized? And so we tried to get this contract. You can find this request on Frag den Staat, and it's quite interesting because there's a lot blacked out here. So I would say maybe 50%. We appealed this, but that's currently going on. But the justification for this blacking out, for these blacked out places, was that it said this includes when the contract went into force and until when it's in force, and how and what the position of these laws is in terms of IP laws. So we couldn't even figure that out from this contract because the ministry blacked it out. And then they basically said there is an interest in keeping this secret because it could influence the economic situation of this publishing company, and that's why it had to be blacked out. Our reaction is federal law gazettes was to publish these federal law gazettes on offenegesetze.de, which is a German website where these things are published. It means open laws. We did that with Johannes, Anne, and I. We did that together. That's a pretty nice website. You can search them, you can download them. They're text versions. And so the Ministry of Justice can find it as well. We also published it on the internet. So we don't just have openlaws.de, we also have open laws in the internet, on the internet.de.
Here der Startup.
So this is the startup page, the comparison of the features that we have. The free citizen access, they can't print it, you can't search it. We actually have text versions of older versions as well. We basically have these for versions across years. We have these for different versions. If you download these gigabytes of PDFs and you want to use them, do that. We think these are public data, you can do that. We also have stable links. The other version unfortunately doesn't have stable links to PDFs. All of these are session links, so you can't even give a link to someone. We have RSS feeds, and of course everything is free. Thank you. The reaction was pretty positive. Reactions were pretty positive. Like here, thank you. And the legal community also reacted in a very positive way. So Law Profess essentially wrote blog posts about this, and were like, "Oh, this is great." Apparently, there was a lot of this hadn't been moving forward for several years. So this legal community was very happy and positive about this as well. And now, Minister of Justice Barley also said that she will take this federal law gazette away from the Dumont publishing company. At least that's what one newspaper puts in their headline. An electronic version of this has been in the planning for a while, but which is currently only envisioned to start being published in 2021. And so at that point, it only has to be published online anymore. But the thing that was new is that even the previous federal law gazettes should be put online and should be searchable for free by the government. So now the government is essentially taking charge of this, and that, I think, is definitely improvement, and I hope we contributed to that to actually finally implement this decision. And one thing that's also interesting is the company Juris is the first company that retweeted this tweet, and they do something similar, but not with laws, but with court decisions, which is also a company that maybe we should have a look at sometime.
Also wie geht's weiter? Wir warten auf eine Klage.
So how is this going to continue? We're waiting for a lawsuit. Actually, we're not that We're not that certain because we don't think we did anything wrong, but we will see how this continues.
Maybe we already have something in our mailbox. We are going to continue cleaning up this Gazette a bit. We, for example, noticed that some of the metadata on their website are incorrect. For example, dates are corrupted and are impossible to parse. And of course, there are loads of other gazettes in Germany. For example, the Ministerial Gazette, which is also very important for the federal government. But there are many other levels that have their own gazettes. For example, the federal states or the municipalities. And many of these are probably in the hands of private publishing companies. Many of them are publicly available, but many others only have paid access. And we should continue to strive for availability here, and you can help with that. So that was Open Schufa and Offene Gesetze. Both of these are projects by Open Knowledge Foundation. And we try to break these rules that these ancient companies are trying to impose on us. Both Schufa and the publishing company of the Federal Gazettes are ancient companies, and they've always done things the way they do now. But we're trying to see what we can change.
In anderen Räumen waren die immer schon an.
In other rooms, these mics were usually on already. Thanks for this talk. It was very interesting. I just joined y'all. We have a few minutes for Q&A. Please go to the microphones. Mic 2, please. In the beginning or in the middle of the year, someone said that the entire business model of Schufa is basically affected by GDPR or could be affected by GDPR, the general data protection rules for Europe. I didn't follow this. Has anything come of that? Has a data commissioner said everything's fine, or what's the status quo there?
Schufa still exists.
Also zuständig für die Schufa ist der
hessische the person in charge is the data protection officer for the federal state of Hesse. He's not pursuing Schufa as much as he ought to. If it were in a different state, things might look differently, but the one change that happened is this electronic data request. Previously, they only sent things by mail, but they assured the data protection commissioner that they'll be using email or will be sending access codes by mail, and you can then request or fetch your data online. That is one thing that has changed, but we haven't really heard about anything else the the data protection officer might be objecting to. And the business model of Schufa is, of course, not charging people for accessing their own data. It's selling that data onto other companies.
Microphone 2 again, please. I wanted to ask about the state of play, whether you're still collecting data for Open Schufa.
Due to these very shortened data replies people are getting, there's not much points. These are often shorter than one line, and that's not data that we can usefully use in our model. So we've currently put things on hold, but we hope that if we exert more pressure on Schufa and get nice long replies, then we can use that data again. But of course, we hope that the Ministry of Justice intervenes, and all of this is pointless anyway.
Hi, I also have a question for the makers of Open Schufa, and you have a lot of information there now. You have gotten a lot of important, sensitive personal data, and then GDPR also went into effect. And I wanted to ask how you dealt with GDPR and having to be GDPR compliant.
Also wir hatten da rechtliche Unterstützung.
We had legal aid. The data are only given to 2 external media companies, and the rest was dealt with internally at the Open Knowledge Foundation and Algorithm Watch. The data protection officer, Nico Hatting, did all this. We weren't interested in people's names. They were not usually included unless they made a mistake, unless people made a mistake when they uploaded their data and included easily identifiable data. So ideally, we don't have that data at all. But of course, that doesn't mean that these data sheets are completely anonymous. Of course, there are certain ways to find out who actually own these data or who these data are about. We don't publish them, though. Many people told us that they would like to work with our data set, but we currently don't allow that with our data.
Wir haben noch eine Frage aus dem
We have a question from the internet. Signal Angel, please. Are you planning to publish these laws as code patch versions, and are you working on a machine-readable version of these laws?
We've been focusing on the legal issues here. There was a project called Federal Git that tried to version the federal laws on GitHub. I did that myself. And there was a lot of manual work involved in reverse engineering how these are made. And we had a legal hack workshop here at one of the assemblies, and we tried to see if these patches can be extracted from the Federal Law Gazette using natural language parsing and taking apart the PDFs and finding out which paragraph was changed in which way. But there are lots of different ways that these changes can be included in the Federal Law Gazette. There are services that do that, for example, Busa, but it's complicated. It's a very complicated matter. There's a lot of work involved, and ideally, we wouldn't have to reverse engineer this like we do with OpenSchufa, but we'd like to have the legislator do that himself. And that would also simplify the legal process where people currently type everything into Word documents. And instead of changing laws directly and versioning them, we have these laws that change other laws. We hope that this is going to change, but the legal experts I've talked to don't see any changes here in the near future. There's not a lot of progress unless we do it ourselves, but that's a lot of work. But we're not the only ones who hate this way of changing things. Also, the governments hate these. There's essentially nobody who really likes this old way of doing things. There's a new project called e-legislation, and it's a federal project that tries to work on this. But I think it's mainly about writing a Word plugin.
Super. Mikrofon Nummer 2.
Great. Microphone number 2, please. Yeah, I'm interested in where this data and these laws come from that ended up on openlaws.de. Did someone basically scrape them by hand from this citizen access and then OCR'd the ones that haven't been OCR'd yet? And did you get rid of the advertisements?
There's now no more advertising included, but we can't really tell you where it comes from now.
Und wir haben noch Zeit für eine Frage.
We have time for one more question. Microphone 1, please. Hi, great presentation. Thank you. I was in the lightning talks just now and heard of a project that is interested in publishing court decisions. Have you heard of that, or do you work with those?
Open legal data, yeah. Fortunately, in this area, there are some very cool people. who are trying to not only publish laws but also court orders, and we're trying to find out how we can get ourselves sued there.
Well, thank you again. Please give the speakers another warm round of applause.